Today we're going to practice drawing decimals. First we're going to look at tenths. Here I have written the tenths written out in decimal form. This is 1/10, 2/10, 3/10, 4/10, 5/10, 6/10, 7/10, 8/10, 9/10, and 10/10 is really the same thing as 1 whole. Down here I have them written as fraction form. Notice 1/10 is really 1 out of 10 pieces. 2/10 is 2 out of 10 pieces. 3/10 is 3 out of 10 pieces. 4/10 is 4 out of 10 pieces. 5/10 is 5 out of 10 pieces, and so on. Notice that with tenths, you see that word T-E-N right in it. That's telling you that there are 10 pieces in 1 whole, and that's why the bottom here is always going to be a 10. So tenths, there are 10 of them in 1 whole. The 10 is down in the bottom. When you're drawing tenths, since there are 10 of them in 1 whole, you'd be drawing these rows. This right here is worth 1/10. When I put it on my grid, I can see it takes up 1 whole row. When I have 2 of them, that would be worth 2/10. 3 of them would be worth 3/10. 4 of them would be worth 4/10. 5 of them would be worth 5/10. 6 of them would be worth 6/10. 7 of them would be worth 7/10. 8 of them would be worth 8/10. This right here would be worth 9/10 because there are 9 of these rows colored in. And finally, as you can see, when you have all 10 of them, 10 out of 10, you're back to 1 whole. Now let's look at hundredths. Notice the key word here would be hundred. That's why in the fraction form, 100 is written down at the bottom. These numbers right here are written in decimal form. Notice that a hundredth is when it takes up 2 places after that period, after that decimal place. So this right here is 1/100th. This is 2/100ths. This is 3/100ths. This right here is 24/100ths. I say hundredths because it ends in the second place value, and I know that the second place value is the 100th place value. This right here would be 45/100ths because, again, it ends in that second place value after the decimal place. Do you know what this is? If you said 62/100ths, you would be correct. This would be 70/100ths, 80/100ths, 99/100ths, and this right here is what it would look like if you had all 100/100ths. Just like 10/10ths was 1 whole, 100/100ths is 1 whole. Down here is how I have it written in fraction form. So this would be 1 out of 100 pieces, or 1/100th. This is 2 out of 100 pieces, or 2/100th. 3 out of 100 pieces would be 3/100th. 24 out of 100 pieces is 24/100ths. This is 45/100ths, 62/100ths, 70/100ths, 80/100ths, 99/100ths, and again, 100/100ths is the same as 1 whole. Now we know that these rods here, these are worth a tenth. The little squares then are worth 100th. If I had the time and the patience, I could take 100 of these little squares and cover up this entire grid. If I just have 1 of the squares, that would be 1 out of 100, or 100. If I have 2 of the squares, that would be 200ths. If I have 3 of the squares, that would be 300ths. If I were to color in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24 squares, I would have 24/100ths. So a 100th is just worth this 1 little square right here, because 100 of these would cover up the whole grid. So there's a helpful trick when you're trying to draw these. You can turn a tenth into a 100th by just adding a 0, and it doesn't change anything. The reason why can be shown with this picture. We know that a tenth is a long row. This right here is worth 1/10, this first number. If I were to take 10 of these little guys, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, I can see it also covers up one row. So 10 hundredths, 10 of the little squares, is the same thing as 1/10. That's helpful because if I'm not sure if 1/10 is drawn as one row or as one little square, I can add that 0 on the end, and now I know very clearly that when I have 10 hundredths, I need to color in 10 little squares. So let's practice over here. What is 2/10 worth? If you said 20 hundredths, you'd be correct. What's 4/10 worth? If you said 40 hundredths, you'd be absolutely right. What about 9/10? What's 9/10 worth? If you said 90 hundredths, you would be correct. This is really helpful because, again, if I don't remember if 2/10, 0.2, if that's two little squares or two long rows, it's easier for me when I put that 0 on the end because now I know that I need to color in 20 little pieces. Or if I don't know what 0.9 is, 9/10 is, I know that I can add the 0 on the end, and now I know I have to color in 90 of those little squares. I need to color in most of the grid. So let's put it all together. Sometimes when you'll have a decimal that has both tenths and hundredths. For example, this is 47 hundredths. I can see that there's 4 tenths and 7 hundredths. I could draw this by counting 47 of those itty-bitty squares, but that would take a really long time. Instead, I could draw this decimal by breaking it up into tenths, 4, and hundredths, 7. This way I need to color in 4 tenths, which are the rows, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 7 hundredths, or 7 individual squares, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. It's much faster to think of it as 4 tenths and 7 hundredths than having to color in each and every one of those little squares one by one. So thinking about what we've learned, can you match each of the pictures to the decimals? I have 8 hundredths, written as 8 over 100, 23 hundredths, or 23 over 100, 5 tenths, 5 over 10, and 80 hundredths, 80 over 100. Take a second and see if you can match each one of those pictures. Let's start with 23 hundredths. We know that we could break that up into 2 tenths and 3 hundredths. I'm looking for a picture that has 2 rows and 3 little squares. No little squares here, no rows here, no little squares. The only one that has tenths and hundredths is this picture right here. Now let's look at this one because it's the only one with a 5. 5 tenths. Now 5 tenths, remember, might be a little confusing. You may be wondering, should I have 5 little squares or 5 rows? Remember, you can add that 0 on it, so it becomes 50 hundredths. Now that might make it a little bit easier for you. 50 hundredths is going to have 50 little squares, and I know that 50 little squares is going to be half of them. This one right here is the only one with 5, and there's 50 little squares, or 5 tenths, 5 of those rows. So this one goes with this picture. Now I have to debate 8 hundredths or 80 hundredths. 8 hundredths is a lot smaller than 80 hundredths. So 8 hundredths is going to go with this picture right here because 8 hundredths is just 8 of those little squares. 80 hundredths is the same thing as 8 tenths or 8 of those rows. That's most of the grid, so that would go with this picture down here. Now it's time for you to practice. You need to please go get a piece of grid paper from your teacher and practice drawing each one of these decimals. 27 hundredths, 6 tenths, 7 hundredths, 55 hundredths. Remember the strategies that we learned. If you're not sure whether or not it's a square or a row, add a 0 to the end and see if that helps. Also think about breaking up these decimals into tenths and hundredths so that you know how many rows to color in and how many squares. Right now you need to please pause the video so that you can see these decimals and go get that practice sheet from your teacher. Good luck!